So some of you out there might commit the cardinal chariot sin of simply charging your chariot in and then leaving it there. This is the worst possible way to use chariots, but I imagine this is only the noobest of noobs that are making this mistake. I think most people opt for this approach of charging your chariot in, leaving it there for 10 seconds or so to make use of its charge bonus, and then moving away. This though is still not optimal and will lead to an underperforming chariot. The issue here is that chariots are not at all designed to be left in combat for any period of time, and leaving them in combat to make use of their charge bonus really isn't necessary. Used to their fullest potential, chariots can rack up thousands of damage value, no problem. So to understand the way of the chariot, we can simply look at their stats, and we can notice they have very low melee defense. Pretty much all chariots have pretty bad melee defense, right? And then couple that up with the fact that a chariot model is pretty much just a big long rectangle hitbox that could be surrounded by lots of infantry and hit constantly. And because it has low melee defense, most of those hits will land and damage will rack up, despite some having a lot of armor like the Gore-Beast chariot here. The other defining stat of the chariot is the charge bonus, which in the case of the Gore-Beast is a whopping 88. When you've got a charge bonus like that, you want to try and activate it as much as possible. You can't do this if you stay in prolonged combat. So the key to chariots is very, very simple. Keep on moving. Always. So find your target infantry, line them up, click the attack order to get them moving on them, and then once they've charged through, hit a movement order and send them out the other side. Keep them moving. There's no reason to stop. This is better than charging them in, leaving them there for a few seconds, and then charging them away, because there's no chance for the enemy to really do any damage to them. So here they come charging in, they're going to get through the unit, and then I'm going to issue a movement order and pull them out the other side. And you can see the damage they've done. Half the health is gone of these marauders just from the charge alone. There's no reason to stay in prolonged combat. You've done plenty of damage just with the charge. And because all the enemy models got knocked on the floor, there's very little chance of them hitting you on the way through. And you can see my Gore-Beast chariots taking pretty much no damage. Here's another one. Line up the enemy infantry, charge towards them, straight through them. Another attack order to bring them out the other side before they turn around and start staying in melee. And again, another half of marauder health gone. And still virtually no damage at all done to my chariot. And so far, kills and damage-wise, they've only got 17 kills, but nearly 400 worth of damage value from 2 charges, and they've lost basically no health themselves. And why not have one more charge here as well, see if we can get another half health gone. That's going to be 1.5 marauder units, basically dead, for absolutely no cost to us. Truly disgusting. And if I keep going like this until I beat the marauders, I end up with 417 kills and 1700 damage, but that's just the cost of the marauders. The impressive thing here is that we've done all of that and only lost about 1/5 of the chariot unit's health. And if we compare that to doing the same thing, but leaving the chariot in combat for about 10 seconds before we move them on, you can see the difference in performance. Here we've got about the same amount of kills as the other chariot, the same amount of damage of course, because the units are the same, but the health of the chariot itself is nearly depleted. It's only got about 1/5 left. It doesn't have much more room to do anything else after taking out these units. Whereas the other chariot that kept moving constantly could still take on loads more infantry. So hopefully from that you can understand the power of chariots when used correctly. Now of course these demonstrations were in controlled situations, so don't expect that kind of crazy good performance in an actual battle when you've got missiles shooting at you and everything else coming after you. It's not that easy, plus it's quite micro-intensive to manage chariots. But you get the idea. We'll talk about the best approach for chariots in battle in a moment. So the main key to effective chariot use is to keep them moving. And that all begins with your awareness of the situation and what you're charging into. Chariots use their heavy mass to be able to charge through lines of infantry easily. When those lines are too deep and thick, however, the chariot cannot pass through and will get stuck and will have to turn around. So be aware of deeply formationed units, but also be aware of just big clumps of enemy troops that might slow you down if you charge into them. Like this crowd of burly men is quite deep and quite spaced out, and if we try to go through it, we're probably going to get a bit stuck because there's just too many models in the way that'll take away our momentum. So it's just about searching for the right spots to hit that chariot charge and go through the enemy unit. See here, if I try to charge through this one, I'll go straight into this other one, and again, they'll probably stop me and I'll get a bit stuck and I'll take damage. Not ideal. I want to wait for the opportunity for something a little more thinly spread to come along, and then we're going to go for it. Like here, one of these units, it's quite widely spaced out, a bit isolated. Our chance to charge is there, and we go straight through it and back out the other side, taking 0 damage pretty much on the way through. So be sure you can go through an enemy unit before committing to the charge. And be aware of other high mass units that you won't be able to charge through, like single entity monsters, lords and heroes, especially on mounts on foot, you might be able to knock them over. Monstrous infantry, you're definitely not going through. And with your low melee defense, you're probably going to take a fair bit of damage from them pretty quick if you're not careful. Cavalry, of course, you're not going through, and even things like doggo units will bring a stop to your chariot, which is, of course, not at all what we want. So be careful of all of these kind of units when charging around your chariots. Also be aware of things that are faster or as fast as your chariots. Things like doggo units, flying units, some fast cavalry. If your chariots can't get space to line up a nice charge on infantry, they're really going to struggle, and these units will keep putting damage on them all of the time they're with them. Also, chariots really like charging downhill. You get some extra speed, some extra momentum, probably some extra collision damage. Nice. Chariots, however, do not like charging uphill. They lose a lot of momentum, and they're more likely to get stuck, unable to charge through the unit and get straight back out the other side. So be aware of all of these things when moving your chariots around. Now when it comes to actual battles, try to keep all this in mind for the most effective chariot use. Keep it moving, try to avoid clumps of infantry or deep infantry, try to avoid those heavy mass units, and you should be able to get some good work out of your chariots. To the issue of micromanagement though, as I say, you've got to issue an attack order, watch the unit to wait for them to charge in, and then issue another attack order. And that can take some time away from microing the rest of your army, which is of course a bit risky. So you do have to learn to kind of bounce your chariot from one side of the battle to the other, crisscrossing across the action in the middle, which means we're not going to be charging through units terribly often, but given that you're moving the chariot over long stretches, it'll give you that little bit of time to micro other stuff while it's traveling. Because if you try to constantly micro a chariot just bouncing from unit to unit to unit, you don't really get too much time to manage the rest of your army effectively, and that is not ideal. I think picking your targets well and lining up a nice charge is way better than trying to kind of messily bounce from unit to unit, as it's easy for the chariots to lose their momentum that way, or to knock into each other and just not be able to pull through units properly. Of course though, it may not be safe to just charge through the enemy army and come out the other side. There might be some monstrous infantry waiting or something, so you do have to be smart about it. It can pay as well to go after the more expensive units, of course. Chariots very often have armor piercing, so look for those expensive units that you can do a lot of damage to. If your chariot doesn't have armor piercing in its melee, you may want to look for the lighter units to go after instead. And don't be afraid to charge through your own units. You can go into the back of the enemy unit and then pull through your own unit just fine. And going from the back also will bring the extra leadership penalties against the enemy, especially if your chariot causes fear. So that can be very powerful, or you can go the other way, charge into essentially the back of your own unit, but you'll pretty much just go through them and you'll be able to charge through the enemy as well. Do understand though that all of this is just kind of the optimal way to use chariots. There are times and places where you may want to bounce the chariot from unit to unit to unit, like if you're trying to disrupt a bunch of missile units in a backline. Or if it's a skirmishing chariot with a ranged attack, you may want to take a bit more time out of the battle. Try and use up more of your ammo before you dedicate yourself to melee too much. Drop a little charge, get behind the enemy, drop some shots back there for a while, and then drop another charge, and rinse and repeat. All in all, chariots can be an incredibly powerful asset to your army if you can use them well. Of course, you could bring 2 or 3 chariots if you think you're Surtha Ek and you can manage them. Otherwise, one simple chariot can do plenty of work used properly. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.